Hi, this is April. Welcome back to my channel. It's been a while since I've been able to do a camera review video. Since I sold my Micro Four Thirds gear in order to be able to afford the Sony a7 IV full frame camera, I have been encountering a major issue. As you may know, I really do love wildlife photography, namely squirrels, but you need at least 600 millimeters worth of reach. And the only way to properly get that on a full frame camera is to use a big, heavy lens such as the Sigma 150 to 600 millimeter lens. This is a contemporary version that's meant for Canon, and I've adapted it to the Sony a7 IV. But I'm telling you, after a full day at the beach, shooting seagulls and different ducks and things like that, this can get super heavy. One of the major reasons that I had gotten rid of the Micro Four Thirds gear is because I was having some issues with the continuous autofocus in video and somewhat in photography with the Lumix G9. But ever since the announcement of the Lumix G9 II by Panasonic with the phase detect autofocus, I was dying to get my hands on a copy. So recently, with my tax refund money, I was able to purchase a used copy from B&H Photo for $1,400. I couldn't pass it up. In this video, I just want to give you my first impressions. I don't want to get super spec heavy. That's not my thing. I just want to show you some of the awesome photos and footage I was able to get with this Lumix G9 II. It's 680 grams, and with this Lumix 100 to 300, which gives you an equivalent of 600 millimeter reach, it is a dream to take around. It is so much lighter, and it fits in my camera bag perfectly. I had no fatigue after a day at the beach. You'll notice it doesn't have the same top LCD screen that the Lumix G9 did, but I really never used it. I don't really miss it. But the awesome feature it does have is S&Q mode. I was so excited to be able to film in 4K 120 frames per second. I love it so much for wildlife. And as you'll see in this footage, it is remarkably crisp. 4K makes a big difference. On my Sony a7 IV, I could film in 1080 for 120 frames per second, but the 4K is amazing. I really am excited about it. The one thing on the Sony that I thought I'd miss on this Lumix G9 is the Sony has a stills, regular video, and S&Q switch. But on this camera, it has a C1, C2, and C3 on that dial. So I was able to program all my favorite still settings to C1, you know, with a higher shutter speed. In my C2, I did my 4K 24 frames per second. And on my C3, I put all of the 120 frames per second settings so that I could easily switch, and it worked just as effectively as on the Sony a7 IV. I wish it was more of a flipping action instead of turning the dial, but it worked pretty well. I was a little bit worried to go back to Micro Four Thirds, knowing that the low light capabilities shouldn't be as good as with full frame. But I will tell you, I was pleasantly surprised. I used this mode called Eye Dynamic, and as you'll see in this photo of my cat, it really did a good job. It found the eye and focused so beautifully, and I couldn't be happier. And I really didn't miss some of that extra background blur that you might get with the full frame camera. It's so overrated. I was finding also with video, when I was trying to film ducks with a full frame camera, I had my aperture at f7 and I was still getting so many of the ducks in the background out of focus. And I know I can step down, but I never remember to do that on the fly. But with the Micro Four Thirds, it hasn't been so much of an issue. The most impressive thing about this Lumix G9 II is the walking footage is so stable. I only captured a little bit on my trip to the beach because it was so crowded and I really am shy to film myself in a crowd. But if you'll look, it doesn't pulse or anything. I wasn't able to get that kind of stable walking footage with my Sony full frame cameras. So I was pleasantly surprised.
I could film you.
I'm just testing it.
Okay.
I just want to see how steady it is. It's a Lumix G9 II with the like a 9mm.
Oh yeah? I do like a good power walk.
It's pretty steady. The phase detect autofocus has really been a game changer. It definitely latches on to the subject. It has animal detect. I did lose focus a few times when some of the swans went behind some reeds, but that's sort of to be expected. I will say Sony does have a leg up on autofocus, but that's to be expected when this is pretty new for Panasonic using the phase detect. I think it'll just keep evolving and it will be class leading. I have no doubt. The 25 megapixel sensor captured more than enough detail to get some of these pictures of swans and ducks in really crisp detail. I really didn't feel like I was lacking at all. I will say with the 8 stops of IBIS on the Lumix G9 II, besides getting incredibly smooth walking footage, I was able to handhold many shots with a much slower shutter speed than I'm used to. I was able to get these photos of squirrels at 1/100th, which is really not typical when I'm using my Sony full frame camera. I usually have to crank it up to at least 1/400th. And as far as birds in flight photos go, I really stink at that. I never can crank my shutter speed fast enough to be able to freeze them in midair. It's very rare, especially on my full frame. I'm trying to hold the heavy lens and I'm trying to work with the shutter speed to crank it up in time. But with the Lumix G9 II, I had my shutter speed only at 1/800 and it did an awesome job. These might not be the most perfectly crisp photos that you've ever seen of seagulls in flight, but it was impressive for someone like me who's only been doing this for a little over a year. Will I sell my Sony full frame camera? Absolutely not, because I'll never get the full amount that I paid back on that. And I do love a full frame sensor for situations where it is just so low light and for times when I really want to blow out the background completely with a portrait. I'm finding though with the Lumix G9 II with the micro four thirds sensor, you can blow out the background pretty well, especially if you're using a telephoto lens. Take a look at this picture of this couple that I was able to take. And the background was just as blown out as I normally would be able to get it on a Sony full frame sensor with maybe a 50 millimeter, but this was on the 100 to 300, and I think I was at 300 millimeters. But, you know, with the telephoto, it really will achieve that same look as a full frame. So I was really impressed with that. But at 680 grams, it is such a nice, lightweight, compact setup. Now, granted, for a micro four thirds camera, it is a little bit on the heavy side, but look at this lens. This 100 to 300, you're getting 600 millimeters worth of reach in such a tiny package. You can't go wrong. I have absolutely no regrets. If you like this video, give it a like. Consider subscribing for more camera reviews from a newbie like me. God bless.